Okay, thank you. So what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and give you a little bit of a summary of what we found out of the gap analysis worksheets and use that as a lead in to our breakout group for today. If you remember from the last session, we asked you to fill out a worksheet that essentially asked these three questions. We wanted to know what you thought was missing from the broad area of vacuum technology education. And then we also asked you to identify why you thought that missing element was important and what would be different if that gap was addressed. And that would give us an idea of how we might be able to measure and track that. And that was in that worksheet that we sent out. So Nancy, next slide. And so we got 9 worksheets back. I want to really thank everybody that took the time to give some thought to that, to fill this out. We've got 9 independent worksheets back. We also folded in the results of a formal SWOT analysis. Normandale actually had an outside party come in and sit with them and do a formal SWOT analysis in June of 2018. And so we folded the findings of that into this as well. The result was that there were 42 individual gaps that were identified that we had to work with. And if you look at them breaking down from how people identified themselves, the large majority, almost 3 out of the 4, came from somebody that identified as being in the education sector. Not surprising, because that's the emphasis we've got here, and it's also something that the educators spend a lot of time thinking about. But it just gives you an idea of the population for these gaps. Next slide. So we took all of those gaps and we looked at them, and they tended to organize themselves into one of 5 major categories. And these are the categories that we're going to try to zero in on the breakout session. So the gaps tended to fall, and you can see that at least for the first 3, they're fairly equal: enrollment, programs, and resources. Knowledge gaps probably coming in 4th, and then opportunity. So programs are things like marketing efforts or new credentials. The micro credentials that Scott was just talking about would fall into that category. And that was the biggest one. 33% of those gaps fell into one of those kind of categories. The second category was resources, and that's not just money, but it's finding instructors, it's getting industry support, it's advocacy for the programs. So that broad area of resources was the second largest. Curriculum issues, technical topics, skills, maybe skill standards, industry standards. That was the third category. The fourth category was just general issues with enrollment. Community colleges have the same challenges that SVC found when they were trying to beef up their programs. How do we get more people in? How do we provide them with rewards that say, hey, there's value to me in doing this? And then the fifth category was not as much gaps as it was opportunities, partnerships, collaboration, maybe new markets we could roll into. And there was 1 or 2 others. They were small. We've got them, but as you can see, the large majority fell into one of these 5 categories. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of a summary of a little bit more detail. Actually, the full detail is in the handout that we sent out ahead of time. And as we get into the breakout groups on the Google Doc, you'll see it there as well. But it's just kind of give you an idea. So what we wanted to do with our breakout session is kind of look at these first 4. We're going to consider opportunities as something a little bit unique and really kind of dig a little deeper into the issues of enrollment, curriculum, resources, and programs. Next slide, please. And so the breakout session, what we're going to do is build an issue tree. And there's really 2 kinds of these. There's problem trees, and that's really what we want to do today. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. And so the problem tree starts with the basic issue, and then you just simply start asking why. Why is that an issue? And then as your primary level of questions. And then for each one of those primary whys, you dig a little deeper and say, well, why is that an issue? Later on, as we get to the brainstorming session at the end of this workshop series, maybe workshop 5, we're going to come back to this and do it as a solution tree. And all we're really going to do is change the question from why to how. But for today, I would encourage you, we're all, everybody in this group, I'm pretty sure is kind of solution driven. We're going to naturally want to migrate to that how. And so I'm just going to ask you to kind of stay on the why and leave the how for later, if that's okay. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do is we're going to, in the breakout groups, we're going to have 4 groups, and each of you will be assigned one of those 4 categories. Now, if you're not completely happy with that, we're going to give you an opportunity to do a secondary one, but we do want everybody to kind of look at one. And we want you to start building out this tree. You don't need to worry about this graphic. We're going to ask you to do it in outline form, which I think is probably easier from a note-taking perspective. You don't have to worry about the details of what the picture looks like. We can make it look fancy later. But we want you to just start digging down. You can use the data that's in that shared doc that came out of the gap analysis, or maybe you've got something new to add to it. That's fine. And just to spend some time breaking down into primary, secondary, tertiary, however deeply you feel like you can go with it to do that. We want to look at things like making sure that the reasons we come up with are both exhaustive and exclusive. If you find yourself overlapping, that's usually a sign that it's a secondary answer and not another primary one. And to avoid going into too much detail, this is kind of meant to just flesh this tree out to see where all the why questions are. And in the end, we'll have this one big shared document that has this information on there. Next slide, please, Nancy. A quick example of what we're talking about. If your main issue is curriculum, one of the primary whys that we know came out of the gap analysis was that we'd like to see more troubleshooting added to the curriculum. So, well, then we would say, well, then why is that? Well, one reason is the better the technicians are at troubleshooting and the less dependence that they have on other workers. And you don't have to put two and three people on a problem. You can have one worker working to solve that problem. Another secondary why might mean that your current level of technicians lack that skill, and so they need to get it from somewhere. A second why could be, well, we want programs to focus more on technicians as opposed to more of a general academic issue. Well, why is that? Well, one why might be because in a community college or an accredited university, there is a requirement to add general education courses. They do have to take a writing course or a math course. And that just comes with the territory. Those degrees require that. So that's the kind of example of how you can dig into these and just kind of get down lower and lower levels and deeper levels if that's possible.